Hello, and welcome back to Tips and Time Savers. I'm Danny Rocks, and this is part 2 in my series where I demonstrate how to take advantage of the commands on the View tab of the ribbon. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create custom views for your worksheet, how to activate a custom view, and the one gotcha step that will actually invalidate a custom view. All right, let's begin. While I'm on the View tab of the ribbon, what I want to do is I want to switch to another Excel workbook that's open but not active. So with the drop-down menu, I can see that this currently is the active worksheet. We can only have one worksheet active at a time. So let's click here to switch over to our main workbook. Now, if you watched part 1 in this series, you'll recognize this workbook. It's the workbook that I use to demonstrate how to freeze panes and how to use the split bar. Now, this is a large workbook. If I use the keyboard shortcut Control N, it takes me down to the very last row that contains data, row 1969. And notice that the labels for the columns has disappeared. This is where freezing panes is very useful. So from the View tab of the ribbon, come over here and choose freeze panes. What I want to do is I want to freeze these labels up here in the top row. So now notice that there is an underline under the labels in the top row, and when I use the page down key, notice that the labels in the top row remain on view. Let's use Control Home to return to the top. Now notice that we also have View tab of the ribbon, freeze panes, the ability to freeze the first column. But one thing that many people don't understand is that when we choose freeze first column, that the underline for the freeze top row will disappear. So we can have either freeze top row or freeze first column. So the underline for the top row disappeared. In place, we now have a vertical line which will freeze in place the first column. So as I scroll across horizontally, I will always have the information in the first column on view. Now, the third command, when we come back here, and first, before I can show you how to freeze the panes, I must unfreeze the pane. So unfreezing the pane removes the freeze first column. What's important when you freeze the panes is that you have an active cell. This is going to be your starting point. So when we use freeze panes, it's going to freeze in place the first two leftmost columns. It's going to freeze in place the topmost 3 rows. So from this starting point, when I come back here and say freeze the panes, now I have a vertical line to freeze these 2 columns in place. I have a horizontal line to freeze in place these top 3 rows. Page down, and you can see that the information in those top 3 rows remains on view. Scroll across, and the information in those 2 leftmost columns remains in view. Now, let's just say that we're working on a project and we get interrupted and we'd like to come back to this view. This is where using a custom view will really help you to save time. So View tab of the ribbon, from the view that's on display, what we want to do is we want to create a custom view. So over here in the dialog box, remember that we have no custom views in place, so we need to add one. That opens up the dialog box. So let's give it a name. Freeze pane sounds like a good name. And then remember to click OK. So now we have that view, and even if we go through and if we unfreeze the panes, and I want to save this. Now, I had one viewer that I recommended that this would work very well for him, and he swore that when he went back to use it, it wouldn't work again. So I created the custom view, I removed them, I saved the workbook, and now I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to come back and open it up again. Now I'm using Excel 2010, so what I recommend is you go to the File tab on the ribbon, and rather than saying Open, use the Recent tab over here, and your most recent document is right up there at the top. So now here's the view that we saved. In other words, we saved the workbook. To bring back the custom view, select Custom View, highlight the one that we want to show, and then click the Show button. And there you go. It's back on view. Now let's go back and unfreeze the panes. And remember, it's a custom view, so anytime we want to bring it back, we just click over here, Show, and there it goes again. Once again, I'm going to unfreeze. Now I want to prepare to create a second custom view. In part one, I showed you how to take advantage of the split bar. Now, with the split panes, what we can do is, again, remember how we selected an active cell? So in this case, I only want to freeze the left column and the top 3 rows. So I select this as my active cell so that when I click on the split panes, I'm going to get a vertical line which is going to freeze the first column, and it is going to freeze the information in the top 3 rows. Demonstrate. Page down, you see the information in the top 3 rows remains in place. Demonstrate that when I scroll across horizontally, the information in the first column remains on view. Let's just go down a little bit further. Now I can create a second custom view. So in this case, what I want to do is make sure that I have the view that I want to save as a custom view displayed. That's important. Come back again to custom view, and this time we want to add a second custom view. Why don't we call this split panes? And then click OK. Now remember that when we have a split pane, we can easily modify. All we have to do is just click on it and drag it. We can come over here, we can click on it, and we can drag it. So now we have a different view, but we don't have to save this view. So I can remove, I can save the workbook, I can close the workbook, and then I can reopen it. File, Recent, and there it is right up at the top. Now again, remember I saved it without any freeze panes and without any split bars. So all I have to do is come back to the custom view and select freeze the panes. There it is. Or come back and select the split panes, and there it is. All right, very, very, very simple. Now let's remove this. Let's remove this. What I want to show you is another way that we can easily freeze in place the top row. I've made a copy of the original workbook, and what I want to do is I want to save this as an Excel 2007, Excel 2010 table. So from the Insert tab on the ribbon, I want to create a special table. So this is selecting the range, which includes the labels for my table. Click OK. Immediately you see two things. We have drop-down filter arrows, and we also have table designs for a different type of shading, or however we wish to have this. We also get a new contextual menu, Table Tools. So on the Table Tools design, let's just select a different gallery. Now also notice that on Table Tools Design that you have a command over here to keep on display the header row. So as I scroll down, you see that the header row remains on view at all times. Now let me show you where we're going to run into trouble with custom views. And just to make this a little bit easier, why don't I just remove the formatting over here? All right, so in this case, let's just say that I want to freeze in place the columns to the left of this active cell, the rows above this active cell. View tab on the ribbon and come over here and say split. So I have my split bar here. Now notice that when I try to create a custom view from an Excel 2007, Excel 2010, that the custom view is grayed out. And not only that, but if I come back here to the original worksheet, which is not a table, the custom view is grayed out. So one gotcha step is that if you have a workbook that contains a table, it will invalidate any custom views that you have for other worksheets in that workbook. Now this is kind of I think it's a bug or an anomaly inside Excel. So there really is one get around or workaround from this. What we can do is we could move this table. So I'm going to right mouse click the tab for the table worksheet, and what I want to do is I'm going to say move or copy. In this case, I don't want to create a copy, and instead I want to move it to a new workbook. Click OK. So you see now it is in its own new workbook. Remember how we have on the View tab, on the switch windows. What I want to do is I want to come back and make this workbook the active one. So you see that table workbook is no longer there. And now if I come back here into the custom views, now I have those two custom views that I showed you how to create. So remember that if you create a table in the same workbook as a workbook that or a worksheet that contains a custom view, the custom view is wiped out. It's invalidated. And I showed you how to use the right mouse click and, on the tab and move or copy it, move it to a new workbook or move it to an existing open workbook. One other gotcha step is that when you do have the freeze panes in place, notice that you do not see any other worksheets in the workbook. So the moment that I uncheck those panes, now I can see the other workbooks that I have in here. So just before I close, I always like to point you to my resource website, which is shopping or shop.thecompany.rocks.com, where you can see all of the products that I have available. I have 50 tips that are just like this tip that I just showed you on my DVD-ROM, the 50 best tips for Excel 2010. It does include the practice workbooks that I use in each video lesson. And thanks for watching, and I'll look for you in the next lesson.